Good evening there, everybody. What is happening? Hopefully, y'all are having a wonderful day today. So, when it comes down to it, I thought that I would talk about this little conversation and the most recent news that I found very particularly interesting. But of course, for those of you overall that have heard the news or have not heard the news, Mr. Saul Canelo Alvarez, who, in my opinion, is still one of the top five pound for pound boxers in all the sport today, or if you don't have him within your top five, in my opinion, he's still within that top 10 pound for pound somewhere. His next fight has been recently confirmed against that of the British fighter, I believe, by the name of John Ryder. And for those of you, of course, that don't know who John Ryder is, John Ryder is a 168 pounder. He is a super middleweight. And overall, I don't believe that he's truly anything that's super duper special. But in my opinion, this is a good little stay busy fight for that of Saul Canelo Alvarez. Now, a lot of people overall, they may be taking a look at me and they're saying, are you defending this fight? And all in all, are you saying that this is a great fight? No. In my opinion, all in all, I don't think that this is that great of a fight. And I think that Canelo Alvarez more than likely should completely dominate that of John Ryder. But in my view, more than likely what this fight is, and a lot of people are going to be discussing whether this is a cherry pick or what Canelo Alvarez is planning to do next. In my opinion, what Canelo Alvarez is planning to do next, at least more than likely, is probably to get this mandatory out of the way, because I believe that this is his main mandatory for that of the WBO belt at the 168-pound weight division. And then more than likely, what I see Canelo Alvarez doing later on that year, at least this year, is probably trying to get Dimitri Bivol in the ring in terms of a rematch. Now, whether that fight will occur or not, we'll see. Or even if Canelo Alvarez will go after that fight or not, we'll see. But there's been a lot of people that have been saying for a very long time that they don't believe that Canelo Alvarez is going to go after Dimitri Bivol. I personally believe that he will. And the reason why I say that is because Canelo Alvarez, in my view, I think that he wants to try to win that rematch, and I still think that he wants to try to unify that of the light heavyweight division. It also would not surprise me if Canelo Alvarez went up to cruiserweight if he did overall lose to that of Dimitri Bivol in the rematch and went up to that of cruiserweight and tried to get a belt there. It wouldn't shock me. Because Canelo Alvarez, like I said, at least from what I see from him, it appears to me that he's trying to get the most amount of belts necessary as possible. But in my opinion, the best fights available for Canelo Alvarez after this fight, firstly, is going to be that Dimitri Bivol rematch. I think that that is the first fight that we foremost want to see. But then after that fight, Canelo Alvarez, he's going to have a real dilemma on his hands. Or I'm not going to say a dilemma, but he is going to have a real choice on his hands overall in terms of who he does end up picking, because in my opinion, this fight is pretty much just a filler. It's not really anything, in my opinion, that is super duper special. Now, of course, Canelo Alvarez, he will be returning home from this, I believe, or for this fight. He'll be fighting in that at Guadalajara, Jalisco, Mexico. I believe that's the place where he is from. I believe that that is, where this fight is going to occur, because that's Canelo Alvarez's hometown. I also believe that this is on DAZN pay-per-view. I don't really know how much it's going to be. Do I believe that the fight more than likely is going to do super, super well? Well, I don't think it's going to do what his Gennady Golovkin fights did. I don't think it's going to do what it did against Caleb Plant. But it's probably going to get somewhere around probably 300,000 buys. Canelo Alvarez, in my opinion, just in terms of his popularity, he still probably is the main face of boxing, and certain people overall, they get offended by that, and they're saying, oh, what are you saying? He just recently lost. Being the face of something doesn't always necessarily mean that you're the number one pound for pound when it comes down to it. And right now, even though I have a great amount of respect for Canelo Alvarez's resume, in my opinion, he is not the number one pound for pound fighter at the current moment in time. And certain people, of course, they've asked me, well, why would you say that about Canelo Alvarez? Why would you say that at the current moment in time, he's not the number one pound for pound fighter? Well, he did recently lose, and quite dominantly, to that of Dimitri Bivol. And of course, certain people, they brought up the point, well, Dimitri Bivol was a certain amount bigger. Canelo Alvarez, he's not really a natural light heavyweight fighter. And all in all, a lot of these other fighters, they're not making certain moves that Canelo Alvarez has made, or that they haven't really been in the ring with someone that much bigger. You can claim that if you want to. And listen, that to a degree is valid. But at the end of the day, Canelo Alvarez was a decent favorite to win that fight. Now, whether you want to talk about all in all whether those odds, whether they were a bit skewed or they didn't really know how truly good or great Dimitri Bivol was, we can argue that all we want to. And like I said, heading into that fight, I had it as a true 50-50 fight because I knew how special Dimitri Bivol was, because I actually know what I'm watching. But when it comes down to it, no, once again, Canelo Alvarez was a favorite in that fight. I thought that he won about 4 rounds in that fight, but overall, every round after round 4, I thought that, to be quite honest with you, at least compared to his usual standards, it really was a pathetic performance. And I can't have someone overall at the number 1 pound for pound spot overall who just recently came off a performance like that, especially one where I thought he majorly underwhelmed, and I thought he could have done a lot better had he changed certain things, and especially overall not gained as much muscle mass as what he did. So we're going to truly see where Canelo Alvarez is going to be at this moment in his career. Of course, a certain amount of the channels that I've also reviewed, that of the LDBC and New Media, they've also said about Canelo that the walls are quote-unquote closing in on him, and that more than likely this is the end of the Canelo era. Now, of course, that's what they want, because Canelo Alvarez, they know that he's usually going to be the main threat for that number 1 pound for pound spot, because they truly know how great and how skilled Canelo Alvarez is, and on top of that, how good and how great of a resume that he has. However, does that necessarily mean that they may be 100% incorrect with that of the Canelo Alvarez era could be over? We'll see, because Canelo Alvarez, once again, these next few years, it's really going to dictate a certain amount of his career, and it possibly may end his career. It may possibly really uplift his career to the point where we've never seen it. But that Dimitri Bivol rematch, if he does end up taking it, which more than likely, from what I hear, he would probably take it at 175 pounds, at least from certain rumors overall that I've heard. If he does end up winning that rematch, in my opinion, he's right there, back with anyone with the debatable number 1 pound for pound spot. However, if he loses, in my opinion, it's going to be very hard for Canelo Alvarez to ever regain that number 1 pound for pound spot. Because even beating the likes of Jamal Charlo or Demetrius Boo Boo Andrade or that all in all of a David Benavidez, even if he beat all of them, in my opinion, none of those fighters, they're really not near on the same level as that of a Dimitri Bivol. Now, some may say, well, if you think that Dimitri Bivol is that good, do you think that you're being a little bit unfair to Canelo Alvarez because Dimitri Bivol is not only bigger than all those guys, or mainly David Benavidez is probably around the same size, because David Benavidez, in my opinion, is a natural light heavyweight when it comes down to it. Do you think you're being a little bit too rough on Canelo Alvarez? Well, we'll see what happens. But at the end of the day, in my opinion, Canelo Alvarez, to truly regain that number 1 pound for pound spot, he's really going to have to try and go after Dimitri Bivol. That's really overall who he's mainly going to have to go after, and he's going to have to make adjustments in that fight. He's going to have to be much better than what he was in that first fight. So it's going to be very particularly interesting, and once again, if he ends up losing to that of Dimitri Bivol in the rematch, if the fight does even occur, this is me assuming that the fight is going to occur after this fight ends up happening. If he loses to Dimitri Bivol, he's going to have a very big decision to make. Does he fight Jamal Charlo and Demetrius Andrade and David Benavidez at the 168-pound division and overall uplift his career to a greater degree there? Does he decide to go to the cruiserweight division, possibly fight that Abadu Jack and maybe win a belt there, even though his attempts may not be super duper successful, because it already appears that light heavyweight is his max limit and he's barely pushing it there when it comes down to it? Or does Canelo Alvarez decide to retire? Once again, I've shown Canelo Alvarez a lot of respect because I think that he has a great resume. I think that he's fought a lot of decently good to great fighters when it comes down to it. I think that he very clearly is one of the greater fighters that I can personally remember in terms of watching boxing. No doubt about it. Canelo Alvarez is one of the greatest boxers that I personally overall had the pleasure of watching. When you talk about Canelo Alvarez, I'm not going to say that he's quite up there with Floyd Mayweather Jr. or Manny Pacquiao, but when you talk about Canelo Alvarez, he at the very least in my opinion, is probably right there with Oscar De La Hoya, Miguel Cotto, Bernard Hopkins, Shane Mosley. To be honest with you, he's probably above all those fighters. And certain people would disagree, but in my opinion, Canelo Alvarez, he's in the same rankings as a Andre Ward, as a Joe Calzaghe, as a Bernard Hopkins. That's where he is, And Bernard Hopkins, he may even have to be lower than those guys for me, because if we're really talking about Bernard Hopkins, I'm not really quite sure if Bernard Hopkins is 100% greater, in my opinion, than certain fighters like that of a Miguel Cotto or a Juan Manuel Marquez. Because in my opinion, both of those fighters, they're on the same level. And if we're really going to be real about Bernard Hopkins, I don't really know a super duper amount of very big fights that he won, unless the guys were decently smaller than him. like that of Felix Trinidad and that of Oscar De La Hoya. When you take a look at a certain amount of his other fights, they were either against fighters that really could not compete with him, in my opinion, or they were against fighters that more than likely, were not in the same caliber of size. The only true A-plus fighters that he usually fought or could compete with him in terms of skill, even when he was a little bit older, he usually lost to. Like that overall of Joe Calzaghe, Roy Jones Jr. in the first fight round, and also that, I believe, of Jermaine Taylor. So it just is what it is. He was able to beat Winky Wright. He was able to beat that of Antonio Tarver. But those guys, in my opinion, they were not really going to be on the same level as Bernard Hopkins. So in my opinion, I would say that Bernard Hopkins, he's on the same level as Juan Manuel Marquez and Miguel Cotto. And in my opinion, Canelo Alvarez is already greater than those guys. That's just my view. But it is what it is. Anyways, that's pretty much about it for today. I just thought that that'd be very particularly interesting because once again, this John Ryder fight, I think that it's going to be a great indicator, at least after this, of what's going to come. Now, of course, Canelo Alvarez, he can't look past anybody, and I don't think that he does look past anybody. I think that he's going to take John Ryder very seriously because John Ryder, of course, at the end of the day, no, he's not an A-grade fighter, but he is a guy, all in all, that's a bit scrappy. He's a guy that is recently coming off of a victory over that of a Danny Jacobs, who probably hasn't been the same for a few years now. But when it comes down to it, especially ever since the Canelo fight, he has not appeared overall to be really as good of a fighter ever since that fight. It could also be because he was moving up in weight. Who knows? But when it comes down to it, all in all, of course, he was also able to get that victory over that of the undefeated Zach Parker. Not an A-grade fighter either, but at least overall, he was able to get a couple of decent string of wins. I predict that Canelo Alvarez, more than likely, at least if he's in his peak form, is going to probably KO or TKO that of John Ryder. At least he should be able to. He wasn't able to against Gennady Golovkin, but in my opinion, there's possibly some room for debate that Canelo Alvarez was possibly carrying Golovkin in some of those rounds, at least debatably, to possibly make a good show of it for the third bout. But we'll see what happens. Anyways, that's pretty much about it for today. But the fighter after this fight, because Canelo Alvarez more than likely should win this fight, it's going to be very particularly interesting to see what ends up happening with Canelo Alvarez and his career. Will it be the end of his career? Will it be the end of his time? Whether he wins or loses against that of Dmitry Bivol, will his career end up going on a plateau much bigger than what we once ever thought? Will he actually beat Dmitry Bivol if he possibly goes into that rematch? Will he go up to cruiserweight, or will he go to 168, face Jamal Charlo, Demetrius Bubu Andrade, and David Benavidez? And in my opinion, the best thing for Canelo Alvarez would be to fight guys like that of Jamal Charlo, and also guys like that of David Benavidez and that of Demetrius Bubu Andrade, because not only would those be the biggest money fights, but those would be the fights all in all to where if people take a look at Canelo's career and they take a look back at it, nobody can truly say anything about his career. Because in my opinion, Jamal Charlo and Andrade and David Benavidez, I don't think that they're really greater fighters or better fighters. Let me state this. I don't think that they're really better fighters than what a Gennady Golovkin, or at least in terms of skill. I also am not quite sure if they're above what an Araceli Lara was. Maybe Andrade, if you wanted to debate that. I don't think that David Benavidez and Jamal Charlo, in terms of skill, I don't think that they're necessarily quite on the Gennady Golovkin or Araceli Lara level, at least with some of the things that they can do. But at the end of the day, those are still great fights. Jamal Charlo was still a great name on anybody's record. The Charlo brother is going to be remembered overall as a great win if he does get that victory. Benavidez as well, and possibly Demetrius Bubu Andrade as well. So, like I said, it's going to be very interesting. It's going to be very interesting to see what Canelo Alvarez does after this, because if he does want to remain on the top 10 pound-for-pound list overall after that, if he, let's just say, ends up losing to Dmitry Bivol once again, he is going to have to fight Jamal Charlo. He is going to have to fight David Benavidez at the very least, period. It just is what it is. So we'll see what happens. That's really about it for today. Thank you so much for watching. I'll talk to you all later.